thank you very much for your presence, and thank you very much to the organizers of this event for inviting me. My name is Jorge Pantaleon. I'm a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Montreal, and I will be chairing the following panel, whose title is Art, Symbolism, Narratives, Exploring Borders, Walls, and Walls. And this panel will hear four very promising presentations that will address the ways of conceiving, communicating, and experience borders and walls, illuminating the material, expressive, visual, and rhetorical character that make up the nature of those. So, first, the first places will be Brenda, Isela, Ceniceros, Ortiz, the Autonomous University Ciudad Juarez, with the title is Oxymoron Between Borders Territorialities. Then will be with the presentation of Andrea Masala, that's okay, of the University of Genova, University of Grenoble, Alps, Grenoble, with the title of the presentation is Border Walls for Sale and Building Border Walls Through Border Advertisement. Then will be the presentation of Marco Mogiani at Vienna University, molds, cracks, nails, and paintings, looking of borders and borders walls from below. And last but not least, Massimiliano Demata, professor at University of Turin, seal the borders and stop the migrant invasion, the discursive construction of border walls in Donald Trump nativist rhetoric. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, actually. And I would like to begin by thanking Elizabeth and her team for organizing such an interesting and stimulating conference. I think it's very much needed. And I would also like to congratulate with the other speakers for the great quality of their contributions, of course. And on my side, what I would like to do and what I invite you to do today is exactly the opposite of what the architects duo Lead Pencil Studio invite us to do with this empty billboard, which frames nothing but a natural landscape and which is set on the US-Canadian border, specifically in Blaine, in Washington, in the state of Washington. And so by doing so, by building this empty frame, they're actually inviting the border crossers to focus on the continuity of the natural landscape instead of on the divisive artificial landscape that is embodied by the very border. Well, on the contrary, instead, today I would like, since this is conceived as a counter billboard, I would like to invite you instead to redirect your attention exactly on billboards and advertisements, forms, contents, and effects on borders, imaginaries, and perceptions, as well as border walls, of course, by dealing with what I called, indeed, border advertisements or border walls advertisements. Well, I gotta say that this is something on which I'm currently working on, so please be kind to me. No, I'm kidding. And I'm currently collecting and archiving an outstanding amount of billboards, signs, TV spots, radio announcements, slogans, and wider promotional or marketing campaigns that are connected in a way or another to borders, to the discourse of borders, to the topic of borders, migrations, borders, fences, etc. So, in order to better clarify what I mean and what I am including under this denomination, I must state that I conceive and I define somehow border advertisements as audiovisual ads and wider marketing campaigns and strategies that are produced for, about, or around territorial borders and migrations. As a consequence, border wall advertisements can be conceived as a narrower category that is more related to walls, fences, and border barriers. Of course, while they can all be produced on the very borderlines or far from it, I'm brought to believe that they generally respond to a threefolded typological scheme, categorization, which is built on their relationship, on the way they relate indeed with the border. Well, The very first ones are what I call the ads about the border. These share, of course, a political nature, as they are principally governmental campaigns or political leaders, posters, and slogans, usually addressed to citizens or potential electors, of course. And as we can see from these examples, of course, they can be logically in favor of or against different issues such as border fortification, militarization, securitization, immigration, or even emigration in the case of old colonial invitations by colonial states to go and live in colonized places. Well, the second category instead is what I call the ads for the border, which are indeed expressively conceived to support the border's operational functioning, as well as the economic services surrounding them. These images are examples of border patrols recruiting campaigns or promotions of collateral economic border services such as border tourism or cross-border shopping. Well, today, instead, I would like to focus on those ads that enact somehow border or migratory scenarios in order to sell not border-related goods or services. Well, I in fact brought to believe that while being the most recurrent, easily traceable, and commonly experienced ones, they often support spectacularized narratives of borders in a very silent yet effective way. Moreover, they do not only provide us with significant evidences of border ontology's evolutions in recent history, but also with a valuable channel to question the relationship between borders and capitalism. This is why I rely my analysis on Nicolas de Genova's border spectacle concept and in the way it explains the production and exploitation of a condition of migrants' illegality, as well as of asylum seekers and every kind of border crossers, through a mise-en-scène, the enactment of what he calls an hyper-visible and loud scene of exclusion, and a simultaneous, codependent, silent and invisible obscene of inclusion. What I am particularly interested in this process functioning is the fact that it works, and I'm quoting him here, through complexes of both language and image, of rhetoric, text and subtext, accusation and insinuation, as well as what he calls a visual grammar, all right? By looking, therefore, at the way border advertisement adopt this visual grammar, we can experience how they are able to combine, intermix, subvert this very scene of inclusion, obscene of exclusion, or a scene of exclusion and an obscene of inclusion, but time after time, of course. Well, for example, if we look at the scene of exclusion, we can see that it is very much recurrent in, for example, a lot of beer and junk food or cars advertisements, which are usually typically associated with an idea of masculinity and machismo products as well. We can also see that, for example, we can enjoy somehow the Australian border patrols that praise the Toyota SUV fastness, power, strength, and versatility for chasing potential illegal border crossers, no? And the difficulty, of course, in distinguishing whether the real object of promotion is the car or the very border control is underlined by the nationalist fashion slogan that we can read on the top: nothing soft gets in. Well, otherwise we can see that, for example, also stereotype dimensions and visions of the other side and of alterity can be promoted, such as the iconic Make a Run for the Border Taco Bell's campaign from the 1980s, where Mexico and the South, more in general, is presented as a place of transgression, of pleasures, where those kinds of activities that are not usually allowed in the US can be pursued. Well, I think I'm totally gonna rush my presentation by showing you how sometimes we can have instead a scene of inclusion and not an obscene of inclusion, by showing in this battle of images, for example, some counter narratives that show, for example, the will to present the borders as open, as easily crossable, or as something that needs to be overcome. It is the case for the Tecate beer with a very recurrent plot of the border walls falling in order to enjoy together a food or a specific product on the other side of the border. Although sometimes we get in this scene of inclusion that is being enacted, we can see how behind the curtains, of course, there's always an obscene of exclusion, as in this case, where of the Selcom iconically provocative, we can say, or problematic, but ads that show some Israeli soldiers that after receiving a ball from the other side of the fence, of the barrier actually, with the Palestinian terrorists, give origins to a trans-wall football match, and the final slogan, we can read it at the bottom, and says, at the end of the day, we are all after a little fun, it's fun, it's great, we are just seeking a little bit of fun. Of course, there's been a lot of polemics and a lot of also counter spots that showed out the reality of actually sending something on the other side of the border, of the wall, sorry, and seeing that actually the response would be extremely different from a playful and joyful football match. I have no time to show it. One of the things that this very wide research at the moment is leading me to, is to the idea of conceiving the word of border washing that is clearly inspired to other kinds of concepts such as greenwashing, pink washing, or even art washing. That is, of course, related to that trend of states and artists, or even brands in this case, to adopt migratory or border dynamics in order to somehow present themselves as inclusive, as socially implicated, in order to sell more. Actually, the border washing should remind us that the very first purpose of advertising is selling, of course, more than overcoming borders or walls, which actually puts us another time in front of a yearly question. Is it capitalism that actually produces and augments borders, or are borders that actually produce and enforce capitalism? This is what I'm trying to work on right now, by trying to carry on a little bit of perspectives to answer to a little bit of questions, such as which are the perceptions of border advertisements between the borderlands communities, which kind of historical analysis can be brought up and carried on in order to understand how the border ontologist mutations are showed in border advertisings, as well as which agency do these actually these advertisements actually have, and how do they relate, and what can they tell us about not territorial typologies of borders.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I ruled the cruelty to cut the time, but it's my rule. And thank you. We will have the time for the round for the question and answer. So right now we came out to the initial order to Brenda Ceniceros, with the presentation about oxymorons between borders and territorialities. Thank you, Brenda, for your patience.
Hello. I'm honored to be here presenting this work today. Thank you very much. These reflections are the result of a research on the Mexico and United States border, specifically in Juarez, El Paso. According to the Mexican singer Juan Gabriel, it's the #1 most beautiful city, but it's also the most dangerous one in the world from time to time. So an oxymoron or oxymora is a combination or contradictory or incongruous word, such as cruel kindness, border control, border closeness, apertures, border close, interstice. Is something, a concept that is made up of contradictory elements, like the border itself. So borders give rise to distinct epistemologies within border studies and architecture. They constitute a complex spatial and cultural conditions. I explore ways to engage with this layered complexity through architectural thinking. One path I follow is poetic ethnography, an artistic research method that repositions border studies through narrative, affection, and sensory experience. So who decides what a border edge or boundary is? Where does that come from? Where does it go? What defines them? What outlines them? A limit, a border, can be defined or marked only after a line is drawn, after a settlement is established, It may exist on one side or the other of that line or act as a separator between two entities. It can define one or can distinguish both. A limit is a demarc wound, but it comes from a human border, edge, or boundary. The concept of a person becomes very significant. Person, according to Yolanda Segura, is a body plus willingness plus a metaphorical knot plus a vengeful part plus reasoning plus biocracy plus sociocracy plus language. How do you define a person? A person can be identified through a document as a registration. Everyone is who they say they are, but they are also who are not. In this principle of trust, this was broken with photography. To prove what is of each person takes a photograph, the appearance, the spoken portrait of an offender, first the image, then later the presentation with words. So it also coexists with the places. Where those places come from? Place begin as a point in space, defined perhaps by use, by memory, or simply by a presence. It is more than location, it's where something happened, where someone is, and yet places doesn't exist in isolation. So context gives place its meaning. It is the situation, the atmosphere, the set of relations that surround and shape it. When a center is formed through a settlement or activity or intention, edges inevitably appears. Boundaries surface. This line begin to outline what we call a place. But these limits are not fixed. They shift, blur, or expand. How do we explain then their whole shape by centers and edges when human beings constantly move through them, inhabiting, challenging, and refining what place means? This distinction between the edge, the limit, and the border, which reflects the specificity of a geographic contour between the United States and Mexico, allow us to talk about borderland places where the social element is essential. The configuration and geographical characteristics of this environment therefore point to the collapse of the division between the limit and the borderland. The edge as a narrow line and the borderland as a vast and unlimited area that surrounds the border. This represents a border because it's in a space that draws division, just like the border that is defined by Ansaldúa. And this is also an important border function because it builds up a transition space. So when we talk about borders, we talk about territoriality. To talk about it is to talk about the limits of the territory itself. The concept of edge border refers to an end or the edge of an object. The proximity of meaning, experiences, tensions, controls. When we talk about territory, we talk about the most important element, the social, the person, the people, and the three movement, beliefs, and encounters. So when persons appears, it appears regulation, controls, new regulation, illegality, immigration, control, rivers, mobility, visas, new regulations, transit. So how can we investigate complex problems like the border? The concept of art of inhabitation talks about the process of meshing different ideas present, which is the result of the Smithson thinking, which we propose according to the logic, to the following logic. Inhabiting implies recognize and identified with our environment. So with a sense of occupation, with identity, the sense of territoriality, the structures based on the relationship we establish with these objects, spaces through different factors, it implies appropriation of space itself with emotionally and tangibly. So what does it mean to recognize? To recognize means that when we talk about the construction of the people identities, objects occupies a very important place. On the one hand, they have an undeniable influence since we build symbolic relationship as a utilitarian ones with them. We give object meanings and occupations. So the interval is the intermediate point between the information we receive by our senses and the perceptual configuration of the territory. How do we identify spaces? With our senses. So how do we translate this research into architecture, the art of living? We have to understand that we know reality, but the reality can be broken, like we have we did in the COVID years. So the border, the proposal is that we do a reflective, sensible documentation, understanding the limitation of the architecture can have in appropriating spaces. So this is the border, an example of the space. We have bridges, we have graffiti, we have the wall, we have the old wall, the new wall. Understanding now the complex realities, talking about migration and all these events around them, surround them, in them. And the idea of exalt perceptive ability, documentation, and strategies to enhance the senses through perception, to relocate the aesthetic dimension of architecture in a habitation. Through products like poetic intervention, walking is breathing, also sometimes the air is great and hot. Walking the border is not that a wall, a edge, and other side, a chuco exists, a dual and plural identity, multifaceted. I'm walking the city from the borderland containing endless edges and interstices, adorable from the sense of dreaminess and poetics. I walk. I'm walking from the shore of a river that no longer exists, that he left, that is obstructed from above and below, depending on the capitalist eye of the white meter with which you look. Walking is resistant, continue. So when I'm talking about sensitive documentation, I'm talking about connecting with our senses. When I get invited to walk the border with others, I prepare my mind to visualize surprises from new murals, new skies, new sand paths, new water groups on the river floor. These palimpsests change day to day. In the morning, we can see the orange and yellow sunrise. Along the border, you see cyclists on the edge, people in transit, doing exercises, neighbors living together, business opening their doors. The sun walks along the line, accompanies it. In the afternoon, you can see more people, some trying to cross, border crosser, hybrids of nation, escapists from dream campers, some call migrants. We are all migrants, and we navigate the same river, but not all people are in the same boat.
It's okay?
We can draw maps, we can take pictures, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right now we have the presentation of Marco Mogiani. The title of the paper is, we say this, mold, cracks, nails, and paintings, looking at borders and borders, walls from below. Thank you, Marco.
So thank you very much. So today I will be talking about mold, cracks, nails, and paintings. Probably I should also add technological glitches here, just to look at borders and borders walls from below. But as we know, we live in difficult and contradictory times. Despite the universalization of human rights after the Second World War, despite the borderless rhetoric diffused after the fall of the Berlin Wall, despite the few numbers of international migrants, despite the relatively low risk of territorial threats in the global north, as we know, the number of borders and border walls has increased over the past 30 years. And far from being a borderless world, some people have called them a world war. So Ruiz Benedict and others in the report have highlighted how border walls have actually proliferated for a whole variety of reasons, and in every kind of region of the world. So here, despite the neoliberal globalization and social and technological changes, which have somehow shrunk times and spaces all over the world, we are actually witnessing an increase in borders and border walls. But how have we been looking at border walls? How have scholars and others been looking at border walls? Some, at least initially, have focused on the role of the state. So they've looked at, for example, at the idea of sovereignty, and some authors, such as Wendy Brown, have talked about waning sovereignty to highlight how states would become more and more aggressive to face threats that come from actually non-states and transnational actors rather than other nation states. Other authors, such as Andrea Snyder, have talked about a reassertion of border controls against the main movements of people and goods and so on. So for them, the state actually remains the dominant container of political power, controlling those movements rather than losing sovereignty. States would actually reassert it and rearticulate it in different ways. But as we've seen also today, some others have focused also on the political economy of borders and border walls. And some have talked about a border industrial complex or a border industry to highlight the economic importance of building and maintaining walls. And here we also have to highlight that, as some of you have done before, that we are increasingly talking about how public money have been spent for this process. Still, some others have talked about or have focused on the socio-cultural aspect of border walls and looked at the narrative side. And this is increasingly relevant, I think, today, where when walls are built not in relation to a real threat, a territorial threat, a real enemy, but have been built in parallel to the construction of a national security discourse, which frame the other as a threat, imaginary or real, and are criminalized as such. But also, as many of you have highlighted before, some authors have also focused on the impact and how the borders and border walls are actually ineffective, or at least not completely effective in maintaining their purpose. So no matter how we look at border walls, we know that their effectiveness is always limited. Of course, it depends on how effectiveness is measured, who measures such effectiveness. But however, while walls provide an idea of closure and security, they do not stop migration, but they only increase deaths and the costs of crossing. And as Thomas Nail has highlighted in his book, the failure of borders to include or exclude is not just a contemporary waning sovereignty of post-national states, but borders have actually always leaked. So if borders and border walls have always leaked, then I think we should look at them from in a different way, from the perspective in particular of those processes and dynamics that evade, that challenge, reimagine, or even attempt to tear down border walls. I'm loosely drawing here from post-structuralist and post-colonial approaches. Post-structuralist approaches would posit that power does not come from only from above, but it's actually widespread across society. So while states and other agents, other actors, of course, have power in controlling borders, to a certain extent also local actors, border actors, and migrants have their power of movement and crossing borders. I don't want here to romanticize migration, but to a certain extent we can say that borders and border walls are sometimes reactive to the movement of people. On the other hand, post-colonial approaches tell us that borders are social constructions that reproduce the Western state and its fictionality of sovereignty over another and over another territory, with its project of colonial domination onto other peoples. So if border borders and border walls are fictional constructions, then they are always porous. They can be imagined, they can be rewritten, they can also be overcome physically or mentally. So in this paper, I want to look at borders and border walls from below, from the perspective of those agents that evade, challenge, or reimagine them. And I will look in particular at mold, cracks, nails, and pictures that appear on the wall. So I'm not going to define mold. I hope you don't have to deal with it, but we all know what that is. So just like mold phenomena, like, for example, the pandemic, I think it's pretty much evident, can be considered as one of those events that suddenly appears and gradually expands throughout the walls. And despite the attempts of the states to close borders, we have seen how this phenomenon actually overcame nation states' borders. To a certain extent, also climate change can be considered as such. It's not an issue that nation states alone can deal with, but it's more and more of a global issue that should be resolved through other means. So no matter how high or thick borders are, they cannot stop such phenomena. On the other hand, we also have cracks, which are sudden or unexpected fractures that might appear on the wall, often as a result of systemic failures in their structure. And here, I think the long summer of migration in 2015 is an appropriate example of this, because it cut across European borders, exposing their fragility. And here, there's a picture of a group of migrants actually queuing to cross the borders, waiting to cross the Greek-Macedonian border in September 2015. So cracks reveal the inefficiency of border walls to stop large movements of people and to address the root causes of migration. Then we have nails, which perforate walls, leaving small but permanent holes. And these can be considered as migrants' everyday practices of escape, of evasion, which create, in some cases, invisible but relevant holes in the wall. Finally, we have pictures. So pictures are particularly important here, as we also see from the different exhibitions that are here in this room. So pictures do not only embellish the wall, do not only make the wall more beautiful, but they leave permanent marks underneath them. And in this respect, artworks can challenge dominant security narratives and open up spaces of resistance. Here, I took some pictures when I did my fieldwork in Greece, where migrants would squat an abandoned industrial area in front of the port of the city in the attempt to cross into the port area, sneak under the trucks, and trying to migrate to Italy and other destinations. And here there are some of the paintings that they have done on the wall. The truck where they would wish to go under, some poems or other graffitis symbolizing their resistance to the difficult situation they were living in. Of course, there are many other representations of paintings and border arts, not going into the details of this for lack of time, but there are many ways in which there can be connections across borders and not only divisions and separations. So with this, I conclude. So just to finalize, crossing borders is not just a physical or legal process, but can also be a symbolic and cultural experience that people perform and experience every day. And there are some global phenomena that transcend border, which escape border control and expose their contradiction. But no matter how dangerous or high are those walls, borders can be reimagined, changed, and subverted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the fourth place, this will be the presentation of Massimiliano, Professor Massimiliano Demata, the University of Turin. Seal the border and stop the migrant invasion, the discursive construction of border walls and Donald Trump's nativist rhetoric. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your introduction. First of all, I would like to start by saying that, as it happens, more and more often, I'm the only linguist in town, and well, of course, first of all, I'm an advocate of my own profession, of course, and also because I find myself in a situation whereby I teach English not just as a foreign language, but I teach English in a department of political science back in Turin to students of international relations. So sometimes it is difficult to communicate the importance of language, but I think kind of manage, as I hope so. Anyway, I would like to start by outlining what I'm going to talk about, which is taking the theme of the conference quite literally. So a new additional agenda for border studies. My focus is indeed on discourse, so on the importance of discourse in a social context in order to create or shape and communicate meanings. And discourse in this sense is not just a means to an end, it's not just a medium, but discourse is indeed constitutive, so in other words, it constructs reality at the social level, and the more so, of course, when we are in the presence of hegemonic discourse, that is to say, discourses, languages, words, coming from people in position of power. And borders in discourse analysis and linguistics have not been a particularly frequent object of discussion, even among linguists. They've always been quite marginal, with one notable exception, which thanks to Isela and Elizabeth Ballet is actually coming up soon, forthcoming. So my chapter, which I've been co-authored with Ruth Wodak on this constructive construction of walls and fences. So this presentation in a small part, in a small segment of it, actually reflects our work on the topic. So meanings, knowledge, and perception of borders, they are constructed and elaborated mainly in and through language, which of course includes also visual language. And within the modern nationalist rhetoric, borders are in fact constructed and not just described in discourse through certain discursive strategies aimed to create an other or a danger indeed outside the nation. So hence the importance of language as constitutive. So borders do exist, of course, as we all know, but not everybody in a nation or in a community actually see or experience borders directly. So most of our knowledge of borders is actually mediated through discourses of various kinds, okay? My approach is actually can be linked to what has been called critical discourse analysis or critical discourse studies, as whereby language operates as an instrument to maintain certain power relations within society, including indeed the hegemony of certain groups over the other. And one of the key discursive strategy that I'd like to analyze today is indeed metaphor. Metaphors, of course, everybody more or less knows what a metaphor actually is. So I will not go into that, of course, but what is really important to notice, in my opinion, is that metaphors both communicate and shape beliefs. So metaphors are not just a poetic or literary device, but it is actually something that is used very often in all kinds of discourse. No, we don't need to be poets to use metaphors, and they are used indeed to communicate and shape beliefs. And in fact, metaphors, in particular, metaphors of borders and the nation, are used strategically to construct and communicate a certain hegemonic idea of the nation. For example, nation as body, nation as family, or indeed nation as home. Now, everybody knows, of course, what I'm talking about here. So we know what is the about intention of borders. Borders divide. Borders actually create or strengthen, indeed, the idea of an other. So bordering is, in that sense, at least according to a certain hegemonic nationalist construction, bordering actually imply a practice of exclusion and marginalization of those outside the border. So with all its contradictions, of course. So in that sense, indeed, the borders both exclude and include, as they attempt to create exclusive us identities, and by definition, outsider identities of the other. And all of this, or most of this, in fact, happens in discourse through language and through the way we actually construct and elaborate language. In particular, when we look at metaphors of immigration, these are particularly important in any kind of discourse about borders. The two most frequent metaphors of immigration. They are not particularly new, in fact. No, there have been metaphors that have been used for a long time in many national and linguistic contexts, not just in English, not just in the USA or in Canada, but they are very popular, so to speak, famous or infamous instruments, indeed, linguistic instruments to actually construct immigration through language. So immigration or immigrants as a flood or a wave, and immigration or immigrants as invasion, so as a kind of hostile force coming to threaten the nation. And of course, the idea itself of flood or wave, if we compare through a metaphor immigrants to a wave or a flood, implies the dehumanization of immigrants, because we address them, we talk about them in discourse as if they were not human. So it is indeed, in that sense, the ritualization of these metaphors actually can make certain repressive measures indeed easier, because we are talking about floods or waves, we're not talking about humans. And of course, Donald Trump actually uses this kind of metaphors very often. The inflow of illegals, securing our borders. We have to stop that flood. And the best way to do that, of course, is to build a wall. So even visually, how do you stop a flood? You actually stop it through a wall or a dam. Now, coming to something which is close to us, of course, as we all know, Trump made also on this occasion immigration as the #1 issue. In fact, I don't know if you can see that, but the #1 item of his program on his website is called, indeed, Seal the Border and Stop the Migrant Invasion. So we have basically one or even two metaphors into just one very short phrase. And in fact, it's #1 on that photo, but for some reason on the website itself is actually chapter 2, Seal the Border and Stop the Migrant Invasion. So the floodgates to a tidal wave of illegal aliens, deadly drugs and migrant crime, we will land the invasion at the southern border. So it is indeed a metaphor, the immigration as an invasion, and then we have tidal wave, again, the other very recurrent metaphor in terms of a discourse of immigration. But then the metaphor becomes real. Okay, so how do we protect ourselves from the invasion of migrants? We send the army, so moving thousands of troops currently stationed overseas to our own southern border. So a metaphor actually, very interestingly, actually becomes reality. So the immigration is not just an invasion in metaphorical sense, but it actually becomes a real threat. This is part of, indeed, a wider Trump's own wider discourse, which is, as I called it before, a nativist discourse, as we will see in a minute. So I'm here today. This is Trump's famous speech at the Madison Square Garden in New York. I'm here today with a message of hope for all criminals. I will stop the invasion of criminals coming into our country. And in fact, if we look at some segments of his speech, I will also restore our borders. The migrant invasion of our country ends and the restoration of our country begins. So the idea that indeed that the USA is in a state of decline because of immigration. Immigration, of course, insane asylums, mental institutions, and so on and so forth. So we all know, we are all familiar with this kind of rhetoric. And as I said, this is part of a nativist agenda whereby borders are supposed to protect and to shield the USA from these dangers. We bleed the same blood, we share the same home, and we salute the same great American flag. We are one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. So the idea that American citizenship is actually defined by a certain kind of shared, indeed, even genetics, we can say. I think I'm probably, I rushed through it a little bit, but I just wanted to open up just a few avenues of research as far as I'm concerned. Description, so when we describe phenomena, social phenomena of all kinds, of description is also evaluation. Description also implies evaluation. And to paraphrase McLuhan, of course, the medium is the message as far as we linguists are concerned. And so certain discursive strategies in that sense are instrumental in shaping our knowledge of borders, in general of social phenomena, particularly when those social phenomena actually imply an unequal distribution of power, so a certain hegemonic view at the expense of other groups. So shaping our knowledge of borders in the the context of a wider semiotic construction of the nation, of course, at the social level. So meanings, which are social, are communicated at the cognitive level, and in that sense, the discursive representation of borders is crucial to how society knows borders besides and beyond their physical reality. Because as I said at the beginning, not everybody can actually experience borders or see borders. So we know of borders in the way they are narrated through certain narratives. And in that sense, Trump's borders are constructed, sorry about the misspellings, Trump's borders are constructed in discourse as a crucial segment of his nativist discourse and as the key elements of social, cultural, physical division and differentiation between us and them. But of course, the construction of us and the construction of them, they are processes. They are socially constructed processes, they are discursive processes, they are processes that actually are shaped, they are social realities, they are shaped through discourse, and they are indeed constructions. So they are presented indeed as true realities, but they are not, because this differentiation is actually historically constructed and determined, and not necessarily, inverted commas, objective or true. Thank you.
Thank you very much.